So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Danny Phantom, so let's start the series. After failing his ninja exam for the third time, the blonde was given a makeup test to take. Naruto had successfully snuck into the Hokage's tower and discovered a large scroll known as the Forbidden Scroll of Sealing, the largest scroll in the Hokage's private jutsu library. It was said to be so great that not even the Hokage could master all of the jutsu, but Naruto only needed to master one. He had discovered a jutsu known as Kage Bunshin when he opened the scroll. Despite the fact that clones were Naruto's worst jutsu, he didn't let that stop him from learning the technique, and after about 3 hours, he had succeeded. As he lay on the ground, exhausted, he heard a rustling in the bushes. He sat up and saw Irika Umino, one of his academy teachers, enter the clearing. Naruto grinned broadly and said, "Sensei, I was just going to come looking for you," but his smile collapsed when he saw the irate expression on Irika's face. Before realizing that Irika might not have known he was taking a makeup test, Naruto appeared perplexed and remarked, "Naruto, what could have possibly possessed you to do something like this? And what do you mean you were about to come looking for me?" He leaped to his feet and exclaimed, "I learned one jutsu from this scroll. Now I can pass and become a shinobi." Irika asked Naruto, "Naruto, who told you something so crazy as that?" Naruto was even more perplexed than Irika at the moment. "Mizuki-sensei told me," responded Naruto. "He said that all I had to do was take the scroll and learn one jutsu from it as a makeup exam." "Mizuki?" Irika asked, his eyes widening, before he heard a strange but familiar whistling sound. He leaped from his spot and narrowly avoided being hit by a hail of kunai and shuriken as they descended. Irika furiously looked in the direction they had come from and saw Mizuki wearing his shinobi gear, complete with 2 Fuma shuriken on his back. "Mizuki," he exclaimed, "what's this about?" "Oh, Irika," replied Mizuki, "I'm just giving young Naruto a helping hand, and speaking of, Naruto, all you have to do is to hand over the scroll to me and you pass." "So that's it, Mizuki," Irika said, "just using Naruto to get the forbidden scroll. Naruto, whatever you do, you must not let Mizuki get his hands on the scroll." "Don't listen to him, Naruto," replied Mizuki, "he's just trying to hinder your progress, like usual. Why else would he choose your worst jutsu every time to test on?" Irika looked at Naruto and continued, "I do it because I won't in good conscience let him out into the shinobi world unprepared." Mizuki growled and said, "Oh please, Irika. We both know that you despise the boy, Naruto. Give me the scroll now." "He's lying to you," Irika replied, "but I don't hate you, Naruto." "He's the one that's lying to you, Naruto," replied Mizuki. "He hates that you even exist." Mizuki smirked dangerously, and Irika became alarmed. "Why?" said Naruto, furious and bewildered beyond comprehension. "Why would Irika-sensei, or anyone for that matter, hate me? Aside from my pranks, I've never done anything to anyone, and even my pranks were done because people hate me." "Oh, you want to know?" replied Mizuki. "Well, since you asked, I suppose I can tell you." As Mizuki started to grab for one of his Fuma shuriken, Irika thought, no, he wouldn't. 13 years ago, on the night of your birth, the Kyuubi attacked the village, started Mizuki. Irika muttered, "Damn it, Mizuki, it's against the third's law." Mizuki sarcastically remarked, "Oh, shut up, Irika. He deserves to know who he really is." "What are you talking about?" replied Naruto, "what law? And what does the Kyuubi attack have to do with me? The 4th Hokage killed it." "Oh, he got rid of it, but he didn't kill it," replied Mizuki. "He took it and he sealed it into a human form." Irika yelled, "Mizuki, Don't, but his pleas were ignored. Pulling the Fuma shuriken off his back, Mizuki said, he turned it into a baby boy, that to this day mocks us by making him look like the yondaime. He nearly laughed as Naruto fell back on his ass in shock at the declaration before attempting to get up and flee. Mizuki threw the giant metal weapon and watched with a certain satisfaction as it cut through the air at the blonde boy. He scowled, but Iruka jumped in its way to protect the boy, taking one of the sharp ends right in his back. "Iruka-sensei," Naruto said in the faintest of whispers as he stared in disbelief, "why, I thought you hated me." Naruto could only look at his teacher in disbelief before nodding and grabbing the scroll and running away. Iruka grinned sadly before Mizuki knocked him to the ground. "I don't hate you, Naruto," Iruka replied. "I have always tried to do what was best for you. You remind me so much of myself at your age, Naruto. I need you to take the scroll and run as fast as you can, get out of here and warn the Hokage." "Why do you defend this thing, Iruka?" replied Mizuki. "After all, it's a demon that even killed your parents. It's a vile creature that deserves to be destroyed." "Maybe you're right, Mizuki, that is indeed the Kyuubi," Iruka said. "But Naruto is not the Kyuubi," he added, and Naruto peeked out from his hiding place at that point, saying, "Naruto is just a sad little kid that has gotten more crap than he deserves. He's more human than you, Mizuki, and if you would even care to pay attention. The yondaime sealed the Kyuubi into a human child, the child itself was not Kyuubi. Perhaps if the idiots in this village would respect that," he would have continued, but Mizuki leaned up on the shuriken in Iruka's back, causing the man to scream in agony. "Iruka, you poor fool," he said, "it seems you're brainwashed by the beast, and it's with a heavy heart that I must end you before you become a threat to the Leaf Village." Naruto pulled his hand back and saw a glint of a kunai, ready to pierce Iruka's skull. Taking out a kunai of his own, he launched them at Mizuki, who realized at the last second and leaped away. Naruto emerged from the bushes, his eyes briefly flashed red, and he spoke with a newfound enmity. With trembling anger, Naruto declared, "I'll kill you if you ever touch my sensei again." "Oh really?" asked Mizuki, laughing, "you and what army?" As though to respond, Naruto placed his hand in a peculiar cross-shaped seal that Iruka could only recognize from his studies. "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," said Naruto, and dozens of copies of himself were scattered throughout the clearing and all the trees around it. End of flashback. Before Umbu showed up and took the traitor away, Naruto had beaten Mizuki into a bloody mess. Iruka had apparently been so impressed and grateful to him that he gave him his own headband and declared that he was now a ninja. Naruto didn't care, though, because he couldn't look at himself in the mirror again because he knew what he was. He sighed as he left his bathroom and went to the chair in the middle of the apartment's living room. He sat down and picked up a few pictures of himself, the sandaime, Iruka, old man Ichiraku, and his daughter. Holding them close, he placed his hands in a seal, and several seal tags started to light up before sparking. A moment later, his entire building exploded, and Naruto was encased in the fireball, burning him alive in a blazing self-cremation. He was unaware of the repercussions of his actions, which rippled through time like a boulder dropped into a lake. Only one person, if you could call him a person, did, and as he gazed upon the scene, his piercing red eyes opened. As he watched the future unfold before him, his form kept changing from that of an adult to that of a young child to that of an elderly, frail-looking man with a long white beard. He carried a long staff with two spikes at the top, and a clock was positioned between them. His name was Clockwork, and he was the master of time itself. He waved his hand into a swirling green vortex, and a series of events passed by at unbelievable speeds, as if time itself was increasing to terrifying proportions. He saw the mass invasion of sound and sand ninja destroy the boy's village. Orochimaru and his forces then went after the other two Sannin and destroyed them completely. The snake's victory, however, was short-lived, as he was soon killed by an organization called Akatsuki. They had gathered the eight-tailed beasts and were still trying to carry out their plans despite Kyuubi's destruction. It was a disaster, as the statue they had used to contain the bijou exploded, flooding the world with its raw power and completely destroying the world. Clockwork stroked his chin, trying to find the ideal events to set in motion to fix the time stream. Although he had done it occasionally, Clockwork was technically prohibited from directly affecting the time stream. Instead, he could only get others to do the work for him. He would need to assign the boy a guardian to prevent him from being killed or killing himself, at least until the Akatsuki organization was destroyed. The destruction of Naruto's world was followed by the destruction of every other world that was connected to it in a chain reaction, essentially tearing all of reality into nothingness. But who would be the perfect guardian for the boy, he said, still looking at all the other possible futures for the one that was coming. He opened his eyes and smirked as he changed into his old form, and then a bright blue light filled the room. When it cleared, a girl in her teens appeared. She had pale skin, a lot of makeup around her green eyes, and purple lipstick. Her hair was a bright blue color that almost looked like flames, framing her face in an almost M shape, held back in a ponytail. She wore a black choker around her neck, a black one-shouldered tank top that exposed her midriff, a black glove on her right arm, and a black bracelet on her left arm. She appeared to be wearing black leather pants with a silver belt and skull boots. After a minute of stumbling, she dropped her instrument and used it as a makeshift leaning post. "Ugh, what happened? Where am I?" she moaned somewhat as she held her head. "You're in my domain," Clockwork remarked, continuing to shift eras while gazing at Naruto's death. "I have a little job for you," he said. "And who are you?" she inquired. "Why should I do this job for you?" Clockwork responded, "My name is Clockwork, and I am the master of time itself. And regardless of your disdain for authority figures, I need your help, Ember McLean. I need someone to watch over this boy and maybe teach him a little." Ember gazed at pictures of Naruto walking by in front of her. He appeared to be around 3 years younger than her. "Well," she said, "at least physically younger. After all, it's been quite a while since my death." Clockwork simply waved his hand, and the vision stopped as he transformed into a toddler. "Why?" she inquired. "What's so special about this kid?" He responded, "All you need to know is that every world depends on this boy's survival," to which Ember gave him a questioning glance. "What do you mean, survival?" she asked, and before her eyes, the images began again, and she watched Naruto's suicide with wide eyes, the kid's going off himself. "Indeed," Clockwork said, "and his death would set off a series of events that would cause trouble for everyone, which is why I brought you here. I want you to keep an eye on him. Although he isn't a ghost, he has the ability to use ghost abilities due to certain events, so if you could also teach him how ghost powers work, that would be greatly appreciated." Ember was nearly mesmerized by the fact that the child was killing himself. As Clockwork waved his staff, she interrupted, "Okay, fine," picking up her guitar. "I'll do it, but not for you, for him. I won't let him make the same mistake. After all, I know everything," he added, "I know all about that." Both vanished in a burst of blue light. Walking out of his bathroom, Naruto walked over to the chair in the very center of his living room area of the apartment. Sitting down, he sighed, before picking up a few pictures of himself and the Sandame, Irika, and old man Ichiraku and his daughter, holding them close. He placed his hands in a seal and all around his apartment. Several seal tags began lighting up, before sparking. However, when the building blew up, Naruto felt no pain, nor did he feel any heat. Opening his eyes, which had been closed in anticipation of the impending explosion, he was shocked to see his building blowing up. The only this was that he wasn't in it, rather, he was flying through the air. Away from the blazing inferno, looking up, he saw he was being held up by a strange, pale-skinned, blue-haired girl. She seemed to be flying through the air while standing on something that looked very similar to a biwa. Landing outside the village gate, he put him down, before jumping off her strange instrument. Said instrument flying into her hand, Naruto retreated and said, "Who the hell are you? What do you want with me?" The girl merely picked up her instrument and played a few notes. Naruto halted, retreating, his face a mask of bewilderment, as she stated, "The name's Ember. I suggest you remember it, kid, because you and I are going to be spending quite a bit of time together." "What kind of name is Ember?" responded he, "and what do you mean we'll be spending time together?" Ember stated, "Listen, kid. I've been appointed your guardian. Until you can fully realize your potential and protect yourself, you're stuck with me." Naruto's eyes widened. He said, "My guardian? Like a guardian angel?" Ember nearly flushed when he revealed that he considered her to be an angel. "Kind of," she said, "which means I especially don't want to see you pulling another stunt like you did in your apartment, do you understand?" Naruto dropped his head in shame as he realized what she was talking about. Ember assumed from his disheveled expression that he understood and would not be attempting it again anytime soon, but then Naruto's head shot up. He yelled, "Oh crap! I just blew up my apartment. Where the hell am I gonna live now?" Ember simply shrugged and rested her instrument back. Naruto gave her a weird look as she declared, "If you can't find anything, I suppose I could just overshadow someone to make them give you a place to stay." He said, "Overshadow? What the hell does that mean?" Ember simply shrugged once more. "It means that I can temporarily take over someone's mind and body and make them do whatever I want," she explained. "It's a ghost thing." "Whoa," said Naruto, unaware of her ghost remark. "Can you show me?" Ember gave him a long look before smiling. As she answered, "Sure," she became invisible but still somewhat visible. "This is going to feel a little weird," she added, flying directly at Naruto, who felt a strong tug on the back of his mind. Before he blacked out, a red aura surrounded him. She remarked, "Never had that happen before," and, "Ugh, what was that?" A breeze blew through the dark tunnel they were in, and you could see their hair blow in the slight gust. Naruto and Ember exchanged glances before the breeze turned into a hurricane-force wind that lifted them off the ground and sucked them through the hallways, causing them to crash into the walls, the floor, and a cage on one side. Eventually, they reached a rather large chamber with a cage on one side and a tag bearing the kanji word for seal. "Ha ha 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 ha," the deep, dark voice laughed. Well, I always knew about the whelp, but it appears that we also have an ectoplasmic whelp to deal with, but the question is why?" They looked past the cage and noticed two red eyes staring at them both. Naruto stepped back and said, "You're Kyuubi, aren't you?" Kyuubi grinned something inside his prison. Something shifted with the blonde at Kyuubi's declaration, and he started to move toward the cage instead. "Ooh, you reek of fear, boy," Kyuubi murmured. "And I must say, it's a smell that's just as pleasant coming from you as it is when coming from those pitiful human villagers." He yelled, "Oh yeah. And what do I have to be afraid of?" You're behind those bars, he said. As he approached, a roar erupted, and multiple claws emerged from the bars, stopping just an inch from his face. Since Kyubi had run out of space to fit his hand through, Naruto jumped away in fear, only to hear Kyubi laugh again. Between laughter, the fox remarked, "Oh, there is nothing more amusing than proving your own power over others." Ember glanced up in wonder. She had seen a few things since her death, but the fox was enormous. "What are you?" she inquired. "Clockwork never told me about you," Kyubi said, raising an eyebrow before bursting into another round of laughter. "Ah, now I see," he replied, "so the Master of Time has decided to alter whatever fate was to befall the boy, and thus made you his guardian. To answer your question, I am the Kyubi, the strongest piece of the once whole Jubi." Naruto questioned, "What's the Jubi?" Ember was going to ask the same question herself, but she could only nod in response. The Kyubi then sat back in its cage. "Before I or my brethren were created, we existed as one being, known as the Jubi, the ten-tailed beast. When Jubi did battle with the man you humans call the Sage of Six Paths, the man activated a power which sealed away Jubi within him. Eventually, upon his death, the Jubi would have been released, however, using another power. He managed to seal the Jubi's body into the moon, while splitting its power into myself and the other tailed beasts. However, there is even more to the story. Back when we were one being, the Jubi was a power almost beyond comprehension. Just as Clockwork is the master of time, the Jubi was the master of creation. All life was created from Jubi and Clockwork, from animals, to plants, to humans to ghosts." "Hang on," Ember said, "what do you mean, gave life to ghosts? Ghosts are dead, that's generally how people become ghosts." "This is true, but, you little ectoplasmic whelp, there are ghosts who never lived, such as Clockwork, and then there is the soul of a human, comprised upon creation, that in turn moves on to become ghosts themselves. As for my brethren and I, only myself, the eight-tailed, and the seven-tailed even remembers any of this. And you being here has given me a delicious idea, that I'm sure Clockwork already knew I was going to have." As if in answer, Naruto was immediately blasted with a red energy that poured from the seal. "And what is that?" Naruto asked, barely paying attention to what was happening. Both Naruto and Ember fell to the ground as the energy flow slowed down. Kyubi said, "Jubi's power of creation was for the most part lost upon our separation, before blasting Ember as well and pinning them both against the wall. But I have just enough of it to give him the ghost powers that Clockwork no doubt sent you here to teach him. Girl, I do apologize, but in order to give him these powers, I need to first infuse him with some of your ectoplasm as well as my own Yuki." She gasped and said, "So what?" Kyubi simply laughed and said, "He's a half-ghost now." As Ember passed out, too much of her ectoplasm had been drained from her, and she needed to rest to replenish it. He said, "Oh please. While he may have the powers of a ghost now, he is neither a phantom nor is he human. Consider him to be more of a demon," he said. Naruto saw her fading from the mindscape, her ponytail having barely a spark left, before he too faded into unconsciousness, the fox's laughter deafening in his ears. This time, Ember was the first to wake up, resting on top of the unconscious Naruto and using his chest as a makeshift pillow. Before Naruto could wake up, she scrambled away and rested against a tree, breathing deeply. She could already feel her strength returning, but she was far from where she had been when she arrived. As she looked down at the boy she had been tasked with protecting, she noticed a few subtle changes. His hair appeared to be slightly lighter blonde, and his skin had turned somewhat pale, though not nearly as much as her own. His fingernails had become sharp claws, and his ears had become slightly pointed. He shifted a little before waking up. and she noticed that his eyes now glowed a bright green. He tried to stand up and said, "Okay, that hurt." Then, as he used his arms to push himself up, he felt a tingling sensation before they sank into the ground, causing him to hit his face into the ground. Ember watched with interest as Naruto's arms turned intangible and he got a face full of dirt. She became aware that Kyuubi and Clockwork were correct and that she would eventually have to become a teacher. She got up, grabbed Naruto, and pulled him out of the ground. The woman said, "All right, Blondie, it looks like I'm going to have to teach you a thing or two about being using ghost powers," and Naruto ignored her as he rubbed his hands together. She grabbed her guitar and hit a chord, which sent ectoplasmic fists flying in Naruto's direction and knocked him back. Naruto yelled, "Hey! What was that for? You need to focus, these powers all about focus, without it, you can end up either failing whatever you're doing, or accidentally using a power, like you did when your arms went intangible," Ember said, falling to her knees once more. Kyuubi had already sapped her energy, and the cord attack had further depleted it. Naruto virtually hopped up and down as he exclaimed, "Got it, focus." "So what else can I do?" he questioned, and Ember nearly laughed. "Look down, because you're doing something right now." Naruto looked down and yelled when he realized he was floating off the ground. The shock hit him again, causing his face to become intangible and phasing through the ground. Ember sighed and pulled him from the ground again, saying, "Focus," and slapping him in the back of the head. It was time for the other thorn in Naruto's side. He turned to the swirling green vortex and saw the ruins of a city. A man with pale blue skin and white flaming hair stood there, his red eyes staring out at the destruction he was causing, while he laughed a horrible laugh. "Right, sorry," Naruto said, calming down and taking some deep breaths. Clockwork watched all of these events in his citadel outside of time. He smirked as he changed from his adult form to his child form. Left. The blonde sprang to his left, his body hovering 10 feet in the air as he narrowly avoided a barrage of ectoplasmic sound waves. Up. Ember yelled, hitting another chord on her guitar, which sent another wave of energy at Naruto, forcing him to fly higher to avoid it. Now to the left again, she yelled, twisting a knob on her instrument, which sent a hail of ectoplasmic fists flying at the young ninja, who obeyed. Thinking, she hit one final chord directly at Naruto, who failed to dodge in time and was blasted back, phasing through multiple tree branches. Naruto exclaimed, "Hey, you didn't warn me," as he leaped from the tree and flew in the direction of the ghost girl. With her flaming hair blowing in the wind, Ember responded, "Hey, this is flight training, you have to learn to fly correctly, and that means you're gonna have to do it without warning or you're gonna crash and burn, dipstick, think on your feet." A week later, Naruto had moved into a brand new apartment, and coincidentally, the other tenants had also moved out at the same time. He was okay with that. A more fitting name could not have been imagined as the two were floating around one of Konoha's training grounds, known as the Forest of Death. Of course, the blonde couldn't exactly be called a blonde in his ghostly state, but the transformation had occurred gradually. At first, he had only appeared slightly pale, with dull blonde hair, pointed ears, glowing green eyes, and claw-like hands. However, as the week went on, he had become much more ghostly. In his ghost form, he wore a pair of loose black pants, combat boots, a black muscle tee, and a leather duster. His eyes had started to glow even brighter, his hair had faded to a pure white color, his skin had reached a tone that matched the ghost rocker exactly, and his whisker marks had widened and become more defined. His body had lost most of its fat and replaced it with lean muscle. A shinobi forehead protector was placed across his forehead, almost hidden by his white bangs, and a skull symbol adorned the metal plating. Naruto, whose temper had gotten worse over the past week, muttered, "You could have just let me blow myself up, and then neither of us would have to deal with this crap." The spirit teen silenced him with a punch to the jaw. "What did I say?" she yelled. "I don't want to hear any of this suicide business. You aren't going to die on my watch, kid." "Ugh, whatever," Naruto said, "I've got to go anyway, I meet my team and sensei today." He dropped to the ground and clapped his hands together in front of him, causing a glowing, red ring to form around his hands. He then stretched his arms out to the side, causing the ring to split in two, before moving up his arms and widening as they reached his body. Eventually, they reached his body and expanded, traveling over its entirety, before reuniting in the center and vanishing in a bright flash, leaving his form looking completely human. His ghostly features and new clothes were gone, replaced by his orange jumpsuit, and his headband had also returned to its original state, with the skull replaced by the stylized leaf symbol. Naruto made it across the village rather quickly, arriving at the academy and, making sure no one was looking, passing through the doors as though they weren't there. As he walked through the hall, he eventually found his class and heard the commotion within, meaning the rest of his classmates had already arrived. Ember's expression softened slightly as he walked away, phasing through the large wall surrounding the forest training ground, before she made herself invisible and began following the boy she had been tasked with protecting and training. Choosing not to create a big scene, Naruto concentrated with everything he had. He was still learning how to use all of his powers, and as of right now, he was only really able to fly, transform, and become intangible. His other abilities, like invisibility, had not yet been developed, so he wasn't nearly as skilled in using them. As he continued to focus, he gradually disappeared from view until he faded through the wall, froze when Hinata Hyuga, one of the other graduates, turned and seemed to stare directly at him. The blonde thought, "Ah crap, she can see me." He looked where his hand should have been, but there was nothing there, proving that he was invisible. He looked back at the girl and relaxed, remembering, that's right, the Hyugas have those weird Byakugan eyes, that can see almost everything, and he let out an inaudible sigh of relief before floating toward the back of the class, causing the Hyuga girl to gasp and whip around, trying not to look at him. After arriving, he made sure no one was watching, and then he appeared again, appearing as though he had been sitting there the entire time. Shortly after, Iruka came in, hushed all of the young shinobi, divided them into groups of 3, and announced their squad number and sensei. Naruto mostly ignored them, not caring which team they were on or who would be on it. He was sure that he and his team wouldn't get along, and he was only vaguely interested in who his sensei would be. Depending on who they were, they could either despise the blonde for being Kyuubi's jailer or be utterly unconcerned. Team 7 will consist of Sakura Haruno, Sasuke Uchiha, and Kiba Inuzuka, Iruka said, to a shrill scream of joy from Sakura, who danced a little as her long pink hair whipped around, for being assigned to the same team as her not-so-secret crush, Sasuke Uchiha. Kiba moaned from across the room. His pet, a tiny neanhound pup named Akamaru, whimpered in agreement and clamped his paws over his ears as he murmured, "Damn it, why the devil did I get put on the same team as the human dog whistle?" Iruka went on, "Your sensei will be Kakashi Hatake. Team 8 will consist of Hinata Hyuga, Shino Aburame, and Naruto Uzumaki, under the guidance of Kurenai Yuhi," Iruka said. The classroom fell silent, but then there was a flurry of rumors because no one knew that Naruto had passed his test. Eventually, They caught Hinata's gaze toward the back and saw Naruto looking down at them with a look of indifference, as if he didn't even care that he was the subject of rumors just a few rows ahead. "Whoa, when did you get here, Naruto?" Kiba responded, "I didn't see you come in." "That's because you don't have eyes like a Hyuga," Naruto shot back, causing Hinata to flush and turn away from her crush once more. Shikamaru Nara leaned back in his chair and said, "So you passed after all?" His hands behind him supported his head. "What a drag, my dad already had me write out a sympathy card," Naruto said, laughing uncontrollably at the indolent Nara. Of the students in the classroom, Naruto was only really close friends with Shikamaru and Choji Akimichi. Both of their families seemed to like him, but now that he knew they knew about Kyubi, he couldn't be certain it wasn't a ruse. Nevertheless, he knew he could at least trust the younger ninja, who were unaware of his condition. "Yeah," replied Naruto, "I passed after a little private showing of my skill level to Iruka and the old man Hokage." Sasuke asked in a bored and heartless tone, "You're telling us the Hokage himself saw fit to pass you?" "I suppose it makes sense, with as much as you hang around the Hokage's office. I was beginning to think you lived there," Iruka said, clearing his throat before continuing to read off the list of teams. After he was done, the door opened and a number of ninja with a jonin ranking entered the classroom, calling for their teams to follow them. One of them, a young female jonin, said, "Team 8. Naruto took a close look at her and didn't think much of her appearance. Her long, black hair fell untamedly to her shoulders, and her eyes were a strange red color with an odd ring in them. It was unclear whether or not this was some sort of dojutsu, but Naruto didn't think much of it either. She was dressed in a red mesh armor blouse that only showed her right sleeve, a very broad material that looked like bandages with a rose-thorn-like pattern on it. Her hands and upper thighs were also wrapped in bandages, and she wore the Konoha forehead protector and standard shinobi sandals. Shino said in a spooky monotone, "I take it you are Kurenai Yuhi," after speaking. "Yes," she said. "And I take it from your question you are one of my students?" "Shino Aburame," he said, nodding his head. Kurenai turned to face Hinata, and the blue-haired girl smiled somewhat as well. The two had known each other since Hinata was a young child. Kurenai turned to the blonde and said, "And you must be Naruto." "A late graduate, but Iruka says you have potential," said Naruto, who simply grinned and rolled his eyes, not yet ready to put his trust in the young jonin. "Well," Kurenai added, "let's go. I hope everyone is hungry. I figure if we're going to get to know each other better, we might as well do it over lunch." Naruto got up and said, "I don't care where we go, as long as they serve ramen." Kurenai simply grinned slightly. The three new genin nodded before leaving the room. "Yes, they serve ramen, and much more," she said. "We can head over to the restaurant, and make the real introductions there, all right?" Ember's invisible form appeared on the ceiling, then faded back through and out into the open air, hovering over the academy as they watched Naruto leave with his new team. She continued to play guardian angel, flying overhead while remaining invisible as they crossed the village. The group arrived at a small restaurant and took a seat when a waiter emerged, glaring contemptuously at the blonde. "I'm afraid we don't serve your kind here," he said, "but the two ladies and the other boy can stay, but you will have to leave." Naruto looked at his team to see how they were responding. Hinata looked shocked and turned to their new sensei, silently asking her to explain or do something. Shino simply cocked an eyebrow behind his glasses, his curiosity piqued by the waiter's choice of words. Kurenai remained silent but gave the dark-haired man a fierce glare. Finally, she spoke up. Her tone was falsely cheerful, concealing a threat as she replied, "I'm afraid you must have my genin mistaken for someone else." The waiter declared, "And I am quite certain that I refuse to serve this, child. If you don't like that, you can all leave." Ember watched the conversation from the other side of the room. Glancing around, he saw the restaurant manager, who was occupied with taking orders and was unaware of his waiter's hostile attitude toward Naruto. She floated over and jumped into his body, overshadowing his thoughts. The possessed manager turned and walked over to the table. The waiter was startled and jumped as he or she said, "Just what the hell do you think you're doing?" In an attempt to defend himself, the man stammered, I wasn't." His boss was a powerful man, 6 feet 1 inch and covered in muscle, and he was a former shinobi who had retired after the Kyuubi had attacked the village. However, the years of retirement had not diminished his skill in the slightest, and he made sure his staff never forgot that. Ember told the man, "You were just turning away perfectly good customers." The man's eyes widened and his stuttering worsened as Ember stated, "I suggest you find yourself another job, you're fired." "Boo, but I was only—" Ember interrupted him before he could continue. She said, "Out of my restaurant, now," pointing her possessed man's hand toward the door. The dejected waiter, with his shoulders slumped, gave Naruto one last glare before plodding out the door, saying, "I'm so sorry about that," before calling over a waitress to take their order. Naruto's eyes widened as he saw the man wink, and then they glowed a bright green, just like his teacher's or his own in his ghost form, and he realized what had happened right away. He nodded his gratitude to his flaming-haired ghost mentor. The party placed an order, and the waitress, who was far more upbeat and kind, promptly returned the order to the cook. She nodded back and left the man, who appeared perplexed but shrugged and carried on with his papers. "So then, it's time for introductions," replied Kurenai. "My name is Kurenai Yuhi, I just recently became a jonin, and this is my first genin squad. I have a special talent for genjutsu, so you will see and learn quite a bit about them from me. I plan to work you hard, to be the best shinobi that you all can be, but first, I need to know a bit about you all, so I can get a feel for your strengths and faults, so Shino, why don't you go first?" The child nodded before continuing. Shino peeked over at the blonde and said, "If I may, sensei, I would like to know why our waiter did not like Naruto." Hinata did the same, and Naruto simply glanced at them before crossing his arms over his chest. The two other genin stared at him for a few more seconds before Shino nodded and turned to Kurenai. His response was, "I just piss people off a lot," without further explanation. With the same even monotone voice throughout, he declared, "My name is Shino Aburame, I use my family's techniques with my insects, and I enjoy studying and adding new insects to my collection. I do not, as of now, have anything else of interest to say." Kurenai simply nodded, understanding that the Aburame had always been the quiet, contemplative types. The girl looked down and started fidgeting with her hands when she responded, "Okay. How about you, Hinata?" Kurenai grinned and nodded before turning to Naruto. "I'm Hinata Hyuga," she continued, "and I use my Byakugan in my family's gentle fist style. However, my ultimate goal is to be the first Hyuga to work outside the clan, as a medic." "And you, Naruto?" she said, indicating with her hand that he should join in, and he sighed. Leaning back in his chair, he introduced himself as Naruto Uzumaki. "I can use the forbidden Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, and have an interest in the supernatural and ghostly," he stated. Kurenai and his comrades gave him a strange look, but they remained silent. As their dinner was served, Kurenai started, "All right team, normally, the Jonin will give their team a test to see if they need to be sent back to the academy or not, at which point the three became relaxed. But when she continued, however, the Hokage put this team together himself. He has decided that at least one team should be trained specially as a reconnaissance, scouting, and infiltration team. My instructions are to train you three to become that team. Tomorrow, I will test what kind of ability that you have, but for now, dig in. The three nodded and started eating, but Naruto wondered why the old man had assigned him to a recon team. He thought about infiltration and wondered if the Hokage had discovered his new ghost powers, but he put that thought out of his mind and went back to eating. Sarutobi watched the entire scene in the Hokage's office using his crystal orb. He sighed, pulled his pipe from his lips, and watched the smoke leave his lungs. He was aware of Naruto's abilities, but he wasn't sure how to use them. For the time being, he would have to be content with watching, and he had to admit that the three new genin would make a good recon team. In the old days of shinobi, the genin were assigned to specific teams based on their abilities, but now the placement was largely random, with each genin believing they would be best on their own regardless, ruining any team dynamic that was put in place. He stood and walked toward his window as he put away his crystal ball, gazing out at the mountain adorned with the ancient Hokages and the great leaf village. His eyes traveled down the line, eventually shifting between his own face and that of the Yondaime Hokage, who had been both his predecessor and his successor. He shook his head and said, "Minato, if you saw what was happening with your son, you would be turning over in your grave." And, as an afterthought, he added, Kushina would dig her way from hers and beat the living hell out of anyone responsible for bringing Naruto to this point. He shuddered visibly at the thought of Naruto's mother and the rage she would have had if she were still alive. He let out one final sigh before observing a small group of birds fly overhead towards the village. He had a lot of paperwork to complete, but he grinned when he saw it because Naruto's adventure with the hidden scroll had reminded him of the shadow clone jutsu and what it could do. He created 3 clones to do his work without even giving a hand signal as he exited his office. It had been too long since he had recently gone for a stroll through his village. The flaming-haired Ember said, "Now, that one there," pointing to a Chunin practicing his shuriken and kunai skills on the training field. Her charge nodded before his form turned translucent and he floated down unseen, flying straight into the young man's body. The young man tensed up before his eyes started to glow green, just like Naruto's. He yelled, "I did it," to Ember, who nodded in agreement. Along with his shinobi training with his team, Naruto was improving his abilities, but he still had a lot to learn. For the time being, however, his team was still completely unaware of what a hybrid could do because Ember had only ever fought Danny Phantom, the half-breed from Amity Park, and he only used the most basic ghost abilities. If a hybrid could achieve more powers, he would require a proper teacher, and Ember was certain that Clockwork wouldn't be able to help, and she was equally certain that she couldn't go to Amity Park's resident hero for assistance or risk being crammed back into his dumb thermos. She tried to think of someone who could teach him the things she didn't know herself. There was only one other person that came to mind, but she really didn't want to think about going to him because, although he was powerful, if the rumors she had heard were true, he was also a manipulative bastard. Nevertheless, eventually, there was only so much she could teach without running out of instruction, and it went against everything she stood for, but then again, so did her current assignment. Nevertheless, she couldn't help but develop a soft spot for the boy. She wasn't sure if it was the loneliness he felt, his own slight disdain for authority, or even the fact that his powers came from her own ectoplasm, but she knew that she saw him differently than other people. "That's great, Dipstick," she said, picking at the strings of her guitar. "But don't go shouting it out loud like that. Most of the time, overshadowing needs to be subtle, so you don't get caught. I don't think shouting to the heavens is the best way to be subtle. An umbu wearing a crane-shaped mask shunshined into the training field as soon as she finished speaking, and Ember instantly vanished, but she was aware that she had been seen. Naruto Uzumaki, the umbu said without faltering, even though he was aware that Naruto was in possession of another shinobi. You and your blue-haired friend are to report to the Hokage's office immediately, Ember said as she re-emerged and glanced sideways, staring into her charge's eyes and back at her through the shadowed Chunin's eyes. Time skipping. The office of the Hokage. Now then, Sarutobi said, turning to face Naruto, who had returned to his human form, and then Ember, who had also changed. She didn't want to draw too much attention to herself, so she decided that if anyone else saw her, she didn't want her status as a ghost revealed. Her brown hair was now pulled back in a ponytail instead of her flaming blue hair, her eyes were still green but didn't glow, and her skin had turned more tan. In all likelihood, anyone who saw her would perceive her as fully human. After neither of you responded, Sarutobi's eyes dropped and he sighed. Well, now, I must say I am rather surprised by you, and the powers you seem to have given to Naruto, Miss Ember, he said, taking a few puffs of his pipe. However, my line of questioning veers more into why and how it happened, more so than anything else, so would either of you care to explain? I see, he replied, then I guess I'll have to take a guess for myself. Let's see, I can still feel Naruto's chakra, along with another energy, which you both seem to have in abundance. It's an energy I've only felt on the battlefield. It is cold, and dark, and I must say, it feels like death. So my best guess would be ectoplasm. Am I correct? The aghast expressions on both their faces were all he needed and a grin adorned his lips. I thought as much. It's an honor to meet a true ghost before becoming one myself. Naruto, who was utterly astonished, said, How do you know about ghosts? Sarutobi only laughed before his face assumed a somber and rather dejected expression. After a moment of staring into space, he responded, An old student of mine had a bit of an unhealthy obsession with death, but he added, But now is not the time for remembrance of things past. Somehow, you've managed to obtain ghost abilities of your own, from what I've gathered. Naruto looked down in shame, and if he was aware of his abilities in Ember, he probably knew exactly who it was that blew up his apartment building. He replied, Yes sir, and Sarutobi could sense the boy's fear and embarrassment. The fox used Ember's ectoplasm to give me ghost powers, Sarutobi sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. The fox was partially to blame because he knew a group of people who wouldn't take well to that information, so he made a mental note to never share that bit of information. He inquired, And what are the extent of your abilities? What can you do? Ember then responded. We aren't sure yet, she stated. We know he can fly, turn invisible and intangible, and overshadow someone, which is the ability to fly into their body and take it over, but we don't know exactly how many abilities he may have, what they are, and what their limits are. Sarutobi responded, I would assume that someone should know, while puffing out some smoke. Sarutobi simply nodded when Ember stated, Someone does know, piqued Naruto's curiosity. Once I run out of things I can show him, I'm going to have to find another half-ghost to come and play teacher. I'm still charged with being a guardian to him, but there's only so much he can learn from me, it added. Although there was no genuine hostility in the old man's voice, Ember couldn't help but feel a little afraid at the Hokage's thinly veiled threat. She nodded in agreement, and Sarutobi returned the gesture. I'm going to trust you for now, because you as of yet have shown no animosity toward the village or Naruto, he said. However, my position can quickly change, and I think you'll find that our life energy, chakra, is more than capable of dealing with your ectoplasmic death energy. The ghost and half-ghost exchanged a strange look before turning back to the elderly leader. "Excellent," he declared. "Now, I would like to meet this teacher you plan to have teaching my shinobi, preferably before the aforementioned training even begins. If he or she is found to be capable and trustworthy, they will be granted the rank of special jonin so that Naruto's training is legally sanctioned by the village. As such, I extend the same rank to you, Miss Ember." Ember remarked, "What exactly does that mean I'd have to be doing?" "I don't exactly bow before authority," she continued, shaking the office slightly as she punctuated her statement with a chord on her guitar. The ghost girl swallowed nervously, unsure of how the old man could frighten her like that. "I thought as much," said Sarutobi. "I will ask only that you never do that again in my office, whether you respect authority or not. I am the leader of this village, and such an action can be seen as a threat, which will be acted upon and removed. And that you continue to train Naruto, and accompany him on all missions he shall partake in," she said. "Whatever you say," Ember grumbled, crossing her arms and averting her gaze from the elderly Hokage, who grinned slightly because, in his opinion, the ghost girl was truly only a teenager at heart. When Sarutobi finally stood up from his seat, he said, "Excellent, you both may go for now. I'll inform Kurenai of this new addition to her team," and Naruto nodded. Then, a red ring formed vertically over his body, splitting into two and spreading outward, turning the boy into his ghost form. Ember simply burst into blue flame before it subsided, leaving the girl in her natural form. The two floated up out of their seats before phasing through the ceiling, right before Sarutobi's eyes closed as he pinched the bridge of his nose. It was dangerous to make the ghost a special jonin, especially if the council found out. For a while, the two were invisible to the people below as they hovered over the village, Ember simply lying over her guitar and Naruto lying on his back as if back-floating in water. "So, what is this about a different educator?" Naruto broke the stillness by asking. Ember only stared at the boy before letting out a sigh and shutting her eyes. "Look, kid, I'm a ghost, you're a half-ghost. I can't teach you everything about being half and half because I don't know everything. As far as I know, there are two other half-ghosts. Out of the two of them, there's really only one that has the experience and power you need. Unfortunately, he's supposed to be a heartless bastard." "What the heck?" rebuked Naruto, saying, "So, are half the villagers down there heartless or not? If he can teach me what I need to know, I'm willing to ask if you are." "All right," Ember replied, her eyes brightening as they opened again. "We'll find the other guy to teach you when I run out of things to teach you. Until then, it looks like I'm not just your teacher and now your teammate, but I'm also your superior." "What?" After wildly flailing, as if he had nearly fallen out of the sky, Naruto yelled, giving her a disbelieving expression. "Did I just turn into a special jonin, or did I not?" Ember inquired with a smirk that was obvious on her face, and Naruto stumbled as he tried to think of a good response. When he couldn't think of one, he dropped his head in despair. At that point, his expression changed to one of seriousness and he turned to face his teacher. "May I ask you a question?" Ember relaxed and closed her eyes as he spoke. She responded, "Shoot," and although Naruto appeared to be struggling to find the appropriate words, he spoke out abruptly. "How did you pass away?" Ember nearly dropped her guitar when he asked that question, something she honestly never believed he would have the audacity to do. "How?" she replied questionably, and got a nod in response. She sighed and turned away from her student. While she wouldn't admit it, she was ashamed of herself for dying in such a manner. "You really want to know?" She hoped her young student would read her body language and stop, but he didn't. His eyes simply informed her that he was more determined than ever. I wasn't exactly the most popular kid in school, my taste in clothes and music, and my rebel attitude made me something of the social outcast, Naruto said, listening carefully. He had never heard his teacher talk like this before, the slang and insults had vanished, and in their place was the solemnity one would expect when talking about a subject like death. And one day, she went on, I got asked out to the school dance. I didn't even care that some popular kid who normally wouldn't give me a second look asked out the punk rocker wannabe. I bought a dress, it was a really nice dress too, and that's saying something for me, because if you hadn't noticed, I'm not exactly the most thrilled by dresses, Naruto agreed but kept listening. On the night of the dance, I was so excited that I thought maybe things were finally going well for me. I waited for him to arrive, and I waited, but he didn't show up. Later, I discovered that it was all a prank by the popular kids, and it was a lot of fun at the expense of me and the other, uncool, students. I was the target of joke after joke the entire next day, and I found the person who asked me out. You know what he said, the ghost girl went on when Naruto shook his head no. As she did, her blazing hair appeared to blaze less brilliantly, and Naruto could see the first traces of tears welling up in his mentor's eyes, though she turned her back again to conceal them. I apologize. Do I know you? He said. He and every other popular kid behaved as if they had no idea who I was, or even my name. The tears began to fall now as she recalled the events as though they had happened moments ago. I walked home that night, I just felt so angry, and so sad, and all I wanted was to make everything stop. On my way home, I passed by a burning apartment building. The fire department was trying their best, but the flames were too much. It was almost like I was watching myself in slow motion. In all the confusion, I walked into the building. I didn't even feel the flames on my skin, I just lay down against the wall and let the fire do its job. Naruto was stunned. He had never considered why his teacher was the way she was, but now he understood why she hated his suicidal thoughts. She turned to face her charge and met his eyes directly. Her comments, trust me kid, it ain't any better being on this side of life. The only thing you take with you is rage and a lot of bad memories, more than you'd think. It's the ghosts that are the haunted ones. And then she vanished, leaving only a few final words. She said, I'll meet you back at your place later, and the air was silent. Naruto looked down sorrowfully. He had never meant to upset Ember, and if he were honest with himself, she was the closest thing he had to true companionship since she had entered his life. Sure, he might have had a few friends and people who liked him for who he was, but he couldn't be close to them because, at the end of the day, they had their own lives and concerns that he was not a part of, but not with Ember, whose entire existence had become watching over him, teaching him, and being a listening ear. She had become the most significant person in his life, and he had forced her to relive the worst thing that had ever happened to her. His eyes took on a look of fierce determination, and he made a lifelong promise to himself that he would make it up to her, no matter how long it took. He also promised himself that she would never have to feel sad or angry again as long as he was in charge of her. He was determined to keep this promise at all costs.